I was born in Detroit in 1916, in March the 8th, and my older sister was just a year older than I was, and then I had the two brothers came on after that. We lived on 16th Street for a while, and then we moved to Ohio Avenue about 1920. I remember going with my dad to my uncle's Ford dealership down Detroit. He was one of the first Ford dealerships. My uncle was, to get our Ford Tin Lizzie, as they call it. I can remember plain as day going into that big garage, and so I was about 5 years old there at the time. And I can remember when my brothers were born. Then we moved to Cherry Hill in 1924. But we came out here in 23 to visit an aunt that lived right across the road on Proctor Road. And so while I stayed with my aunt in 1923, for the summer, my dad was building a house across the road. This house was halfway between Ridge Road and Denton Road on Proctor Road. So that was about a good, almost a mile for us to walk to Cherry Hill School. We lived there about 3 years. My dad had bought 25 acres there, and we moved up to a house that was on just above the bridge on Ridge Road, and lived there about 4 years, I guess, something like that. And I came home from school. I went to high school in Ypsilanti. I came home just in time to see the walls fall in. Our house had burned to the ground. I had my sister's dress on at the time that day, and so I didn't have any clothes. But we were handed a lot of clothes in a hurry, and we managed. We were split up. My mother and father went one place, and my two brothers went another. Neighbors took us in, and then we went into Ypsilanti and stayed for about 6 months, and then we came back out and stayed at the house that was just across the road, practically from where we had lived. And we lived there about, not more than 6 months, and Mr. Elliott, who his wife had died, lived just up the road in the house that I live in now, and have lived in for over 50 years. He came up and wanted us to come there and live with him. My father built these two houses, but he also was a decorator. He painted and papered and did all kinds of repair work. He was, I guess they call it, or they call it, jack of all trades. But he was very good at it. Well, then when he was, he was about 19, it was during the Depression, so it must have been about 1930, 29 or 30, that he got a job at Ford's in Ypsilanti. And during the Depression, he worked for the farmers, painted barns, worked for making hay, and got paid by the farmers with chickens, butter, eggs, corn, vegetables. And because he was supporting 4 children, his wife and his mother-in-law, it'd be my step-grandmother, and Mr. Elliott was living there. He had 1 room still. So that was a lot of people that he was feeding and taking care of. Then he got a job at Ford's in Ypsilanti about 1931, I believe it was. And he was painting big machinery, and he was painting the machinery down at the Rawsonville Dam, and Mr. Ford used to come in there and sit down and talk to him, and that was kind of interesting. He'd come home and tell about seeing Mr. Ford. My mother was a very dedicated mother, but she was ill from the time I was 10 years old. And my sister and I did the housework and did the washing and ironing. And I learned how to do most things. Except my mother we could prepare the vegetables. My mother made the meat. My sister learned how to bake cakes, and I made pies. My sister would never make a pie. She never did all the time she had 4 children of her own. And so it was, my mother sewed a lot. She sewed a lot of beautiful things for us girls, and made, I can remember she made it. I can remember, we still live in Detroit. I can remember her making a black sateen dress with panties to match, and the panties had a little cuff on the bottom, and they were embroidered with yellow, something like this. And I can remember they had to walk. This was when I was a kindergartner, and we had to walk. We lived on Ohio. I had to walk across the railroad track to get to this little building that was a schoolhouse. And so my mother and a neighbor, she had 1 daughter, would walk my sister and I and the other girl to school. And I remember trying to pull those panties up so they wouldn't show. Then I went there. I went to Noble School. It was on Fullerton, close to Ohio. But I had to cross Grand River. And I can remember, I did a dumb thing then too. My sister was playing the piano. I thought, and they had a assembly meeting, and a teacher asked if there's anybody that wanted to do anything. I volunteered to play the piano. I got up there, I couldn't play a set. oh golly, that's a long time ago. I started at Cherry Hill School in 1924, and we walked about a mile to school, and so we had to take our lunch, and the school was, there were all 8 grades and 1 teacher, and there was a big furnace in the corner of the room at Cherry Hill, I remember, and other than that, it was like this school, only I think it's a little larger than this school. And we had graduated desks. The smaller children would be on one side of the room, then graduate to the west side in size. And we started out in the morning with about a 15-minute period of, we sang songs, we had a prayer, we had a pledge of allegiance to the flag. Then we had what they still call showtime, and tell us something that happened at home or on the way to school. And it was a 15-minute recess in the morning, and a half hour at noon, and a 15-minute recess in the afternoon. Recesses during the good weather. The good weather. We would play games outside, and
what games did you play?
Well, we played baseball and capture the flag, and Annie over, that was throwing a ball over the schoolhouse with a team on each side of the school and a captain out in front to keep score. And that was one that was quite, the kids liked to play that quite well. They played jacks.
Did they score points if it
Yes,
went over?
yes, if they caught it. When it was bad weather, we'd have spelling bees and play checkers or sing songs, and we had some other games too that they used to play. Teacher was responsible for the janitorship of the school, and my future husband was one of the, in fact, he had 6 brothers. There were 7 West boys. They all took turns starting the fire in the morning, which the teacher usually was responsible for, but having somebody that close, the boys did it. And the girls, there were committees set up for washing the boards and hanging the flag, dusting, sweeping the floor. But the girls also had a job of making soup or cocoa for hot lunches. That was during the winter time. We had helping teachers that came out from Detroit about once a month with art classes and music, and we sometimes would share with Hanford School, which was on the corner of Hanford and Ridge Road. That was about a couple miles up the road, and we would go up there, and a couple times a year we'd exchange ball games with Canton Center. That was after Hanford had left, had been consolidated. Cherry Hill and Canton Center played baseball together, and there was a lot of communication then because with other schools, because this was done with parents driving them. They had to be a carpool because there was no way. We still didn't have transportation for schools until 1956. In 1942, Mr. Ford had purchased 1,000 acres out here between Ridge and Gopherson and Cherry Hill and Geddes Road. and he had purchased the creamery, which was on the corner of the Ridge and Cherry Hill, and he moved the creamery over and made it into a dormitory for disabled veterans for the Second World War. And at the time, the bomber plant was going at this time. Then he was on his way over to the farm one day, and there was a woman sitting on the bank of the ditch with several children with her, and he stopped to talk to her. Mr. Ford was very friendly, talking to anybody he would see, and he stopped to talk to her, and he found out that she had 10 children. Her husband was out of work, and they had nowhere to go. He put the man to work on the farm there and put them in that house, and then he went around to 3 different schools to find a school that would take in, as I remember, there was about 6 of the 10 that were school age. And he went to Fowler School, which was on the corner of Geddes and Ridge Road. We're almost on the corner. And they turned him down because it was a much smaller school than Cherry Hill. And he went to Cherry Hill first. And my husband was on the school board at the time, so I know this. And because we had about 30 kids in all 8 grades and 1 teacher, and these children were outside of the county. They were in Washtenaw County and outside of the district. They turned him down. So he went on over to Free Church School, which was on Gopherson Road, south of Cherry Hill, or north of Cherry Hill Road. And they couldn't take him either. And so he came back to Cherry Hill and said if he took over the school, made it part of the Greenfield Village Schools, would they allow that? So that's what they did. And he added on 2 rooms in the back and lavatories, put down lavatories, which we never had before. We had outhouses before that. And put a basement under it and put a carpenter shop in the basement, put in tools for the boys and sewing machines for the girls. And then we had also looms. I have some things over here on the shelf that they made. They made purses and little rugs. And that went on from 42 until 47 when he died. And young Mr. Ford came back from Europe to take over Ford Motor, and he turned all the schools back to see wherever Mr. Ford had one of these little factories all over there. There was something like 65 little small factories. He got interested in the schools. You know why? Because he hadn't had an academic school himself, and he took his son out of school in the 10th grade because Mrs. Mary Howe told me, she was in the room at the time, she went to school with Edsel Ford. She told me about him coming in and taking Edsel out to go and work with him down Detroit. So, and we also have a medal that we got somehow for Ford from Dearborn, appreciation medal. This is because of his interest in education for the children. But he also paid for all of their medical any medication they needed or medical things they needed, all their glasses, dental, without charge. They would go down to Ford Hospital. Now I know this because my oldest girl, Nancy, was going to school and she had a hacky little cough that she was very annoying to the teacher, and she kept sending her home, but she couldn't stop. So we took her to Ford Hospital, and she had her tonsils and adenoids out, and she's been all right since then.
And that
But
was
that didn't charge us. They didn't charge us a thing. So that was quite an experience.
Amazing.
Then after Mr. Ford died, we got the school back, and in 47, and we went on, and then we consolidated with Plymouth in 55. And when we did that, the schools were broken up. As I said, the kindergartners came here to Canton Center, and the Cherry Hill was, I'm not really sure, but I think it was 1 to 6. It might have been 1 to 4, I'm not sure. But anyhow, the youngsters were spread around in 2 or 3 different schools. There was Cherry Hill, Canton Center, and Truesdale, and I don't know if there's any others or not. When I came out from Detroit, I was supposed to go into the 3rd grade. Well, there wasn't a 3rd grade, and the teacher was not about to set up about 5 classes for 1 child. So she thought I could manage it and put me in the 4th grade. Well, I learned to read, but I missed out on my 3rd grade math. And I never did learn my multiplication tables. Anyhow, mischief. Well, as I said, when we lived up there on the hill, the land was owned by the company called Gofferson Trucks, and they had a whole group. There must have been about 10 horses that were in the old barn that was just a relic, of the barn. And there was a couple of apple trees out in the middle of the pasture. And I used to go out there and climb the trees and feed the horses. And those horses were not, they were not being used for anything. And I was probably in a lot of danger, but I didn't know it. And I know one time I climbed up on a beam in the barn and was feeding them apples. But I can't remember any other mischief I got into. I was very shy. Read a lot. In fact, even when I went to high school, I always had my nose in a book. In fact, I worked as a librarian's helper 2 different years. We had 3 churches, Methodist churches in Canton. There were 2 in Canton and 1 in Denton, and that were together for 90 years. And the young people would go back and forth to the 3 churches. And we had picnics. In the summertime we went to the lakes swimming, but we had choruses. We we sang together. And we square danced, and they had box socials at the school, and sometimes church. And we also had plays that we put on between the different churches.
The Cherry Hill Inn, young people probably met each other there also. That was a family place, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. There was a dance hall up. See, the inn is 100-foot square, and half of it upstairs is a dance hall, or was a dance hall. Yeah, every Saturday night there was a dance.
Now, I read in Cornerstones, that's kind of where you caught your husband's eye first.
It was Halloween, and I had my cousin Robert Holding's baseball suit on. I was 7 years old then, because that was before we moved out here, and yeah, and he had his eye on me from the very beginning. When we was a little older, I was about 11, I guess. He was 3 years older than I was. And when I was about 11 years old, he used to sneak me a note when I walked in church. And I put him in a purse in the storeroom, I thought. My mother found them, and she got rid of them. Oh, anyhow.
It didn't help, did it?
No, it didn't help at all. Oh, shoot. That was 11 years old. That was, and then when we started, I started to high school, I used to ride we had to do carpool, and there was about 5 of us who would ride with him, and he went to Ypsilanti High, and I went to Roosevelt. I went to Roosevelt because it was during the Depression, and my father did not have the money because it cost $180 a pupil to go to Ypsilanti High, and it was $10 at Roosevelt. Most of the people there at Cherry Hill, the kids would go to Ypsilanti High because they were farmers. They had the money, they could afford to send their kids to but my dad, as I said, had 8 people, and he just couldn't afford it, so we went to Roosevelt. Well, anyway, I started to say he would leave them, because they were building an addition onto the Ypsilanti school. He would leave the rest of them off there, and then he'd take me up to Roosevelt. And I'd get to Roosevelt probably about 7 o'clock, and the janitor would let me in, and I'd have to wait, for school to start. But he would make me, he would kiss me before I get out of the car. He'd let me out of the car. So that was, but then I dated another guy too, and that was competition between the two of them. But he won out.
His family owned the store next to the Cherry Hill Inn originally, correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then they bought the Cherry Hill Inn. But the West store, either way, was a gathering place for the community.
Yes, right. Uh-huh.
Tell me a little bit about the store.
Well, the store was a general store. It was cut in half with, the one half was the store was a little bit smaller than the other half. It had a big wide stairway. The stairway was probably as wide as that section there. That went upstairs to the dance hall and to the rooms on the one side that were for renting for guests. And the room on the first floor was an ice cream parlor. And had the old time iron.
Oh, the
wrought iron chairs and tables. And the store was just a typical old grocery store, hardwood store, selling everything from soup to nuts. Pails to horse collars to nails to anything you want, because it was the only store in Canton other than the ones that were at Sheldon. See, at one time Sheldon and Cherry Hill were the only clusters of buildings from 1825 until 1970. And so that was the gathering place. When we used to, the girls used to stop at the store and get vegetables maybe, or to make soup. They'd stop at the creamery and get milk. And but at the store, in the wintertime especially, there'd be a whole bunch of cars around and men around the pot-belly stove in the back swapping stories. And it was fun to go in there sometimes. The guys would, I remember there was one man who had a great big heavy, like a bearskin coat and hat, and he was going out the door and he says, I guess I better get home before my wife kicks me out or something like that. No, I'm going to ask her if dinner's ready, and if it is, I'm going to tell her I'm not hungry. There were just a lot of telling fish stories to tell, and it was fun to listen to them.
And the only other places that if people wanted anything beyond the general store, they would go where? To Plymouth or to
Plymouth or Ypsilanti.
Oh, Ypsilanti.
Yeah. See, the Ypsilanti is just 7.5 miles south of Cherry Hill, and Plymouth is just 7.5 miles north of Cherry Hill. So we're right in the center. So the kids that lived north of Cherry Hill went to Plymouth to high school. Those that were south of Cherry Hill went to Ypsilanti. That kind of broke up the friendship of a lot of the students that had been going together for years.
I understand Jake West was kind of a familiar character
Yes,
in this area too.
he was known all over. Not any more than my husband was, though. Because my husband, as I told you, he had first he sold Fuller brushes up in the Keweenaw Peninsula, and that was just one summer. And he said they used to be, he and his brother would get down to, they would have maybe a dime, and then they'd sell something, they'd run and get something to eat. But because this was during the Depression, you see. But then he came home and he had a van first. He went door to door. That was when we first got married, and we were living in that house next to the store, where it had been the old store. And then, well, when we lived in them 6 months, that's when we first married, we had a van. Then we bought a big truck from Silkwork Oil. It was they had several gas stations that they serviced with tools and that sort of thing. So they had shelves all up and down. There was a big, like a big van, and they had that and went from door to door. And you know, it's in my book, in the book, about him tipping over the truck because he was watching somebody was doing something with some sheep out in the field. He was on the wrong side of the road. He tipped it over, and he called me to bring him some oil. And just luckily there was a county truck there that helped him get him out. But it took us days to clean up that mess. Oh, it was such a mess. The roads were just mostly one lane, and you'd have to pull out over to pass a car, because when I first came out here, there were still horse and buggy. There was a few trucks and a few cars, but not many. The farmers that had property along the road had to keep up the roads themselves. They would use a flat wooden platform with logs and scrape the road. And then in the wintertime, they would have to do the same thing, only scrape the snow. They didn't pay taxes then, so that was part of the taxes. Also, in 1926, my father-in-law and Mr. Gill went around from house to house and got money to buy the poles, Edison poles, because the Edison would put up the wire, but they would not buy provide the poles. There was kerosene lamps in the school, but there was in the church there was a wrought iron. 3 of them that were that shape, but they were huge, great big ones that were lit by gas, because they had a tank that was on the wall towards the front of the church, and it went over to the. So that changed in 1926. And the roads, as I said, were very bad. You know, in the beginning, the roads in the spring were almost impassable, especially Napier Road, Ford Road. That was the reason they couldn't put Ford Road through, was because of the swamps. When we lived in this house, first house on Proctor Road, I can remember my dad getting stuck in the clay. The tires down this. My mother was out there trying to help. And she got stuck, lost her boots in the clay. Yeah, because it was just awful. This is the Ice Age. You see where Michigan is? And it has a little black mark in there. You see how much water there is beyond that before you get to the Detroit River, which is way down here. It was all underwater at one time. All of Wayne County was all underwater. From Ridge Road. Ridge Road is the beach of the old Ice Age lake. Talking about the underground lakes that we have in Canton. This is just a small part of a big, large map we've got that shows these are what they call aquifers, or underground lakes. Now these are the largest that are in Wayne County. These are under Canton. This would be Joy Road up here. And this would be Michigan Avenue down here. This is Napier Road on this side here. And this is over here is Hannon Road. See, this is Wayne. There's a little bit of a one there. There's another little one at Flat Rock. Another little one at, it's out farther. But they're only little lakes. These are under Canton. This is why we have so much water in Canton. And you know the depth of this table goes from anywhere from 1 foot down to 12 foot down, that these marks are. All these little blue marks on here are flowing or artesian wells. One of my neighbors just hit an artesian well. One of the house boys hit an artesian well that pumps water at 58 degrees at 60 gallons a minute. They're using it to cool the corn at his dad's sheds that are almost a quarter of a mile from where the well is. And they were building the Erie Canal in 1817. They sent out from Washington, D.C., they sent out surveyors. We have a surveyor's map of 1818. But they went back to Washington in 1820 and said, forget Michigan, it's not worth bothering with because of all the heavy trees and heavily timbered and the swamps. They said, forget Michigan, not worth bothering with. But Mr. Cass was governor of the whole territory, so he sent Mr. Schoolcraft and Mr. Houghton around the whole territory, which included Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. And they came back in 1827 with the knowledge of the iron ore and the copper ore, and also the pine trees here in Canton. When the farmers cleared the farms here in Canton, the trees were so close together and so tall that the foliage was way at the top. So they made wonderful beams for electric beams for poles or beams for ships. But they also took them from here down to Ohio by ox cart to build the barges for Erie Canal. Now we found this out it was an article in an automobile travel magazine, and I never did think to catch that and hang on to it. You know, we had Indians in Canton. There was a settlement right where our cemetery is, next to the church. I know this for a fact because my daughter's father-in-law was a 9-year-old student at Cherry Hill, and he's in his late 80s now, and he went by horse and buggy. His folks took him by horse and buggy to Ypsilanti to talk to a 91-year-old man by the name of Lewis, who had been born at Cherry Hill. And he told about how the Indians were still here when the white man came here and settled The Potawatomi Indians lived there at Cherry Hill, and you know there are several of the roads that are Indian trails. There's Ridge Road. And Ridge Road was called the Potawatomi Road when I first came to Cherry Hill. When they went back in 27, Houghton and Schoolcraft went back to Washington in 1827. We had a lot of trade with China between 1820 and 1840. And there was a law in Washington legislature saying there couldn't be a new township named for an existing post office name in the States. So they picked 3 names from China: Peking, Nankin, and Canton. Canton's the only one left. The others have been absorbed by the different cities. That's why in 1961 we became a charter township, so that we could not be annexed by outside cities. At the time that Canton was established to a 36 square mile township, Plymouth claimed all of Canton, clear to below Michigan Avenue, and claimed all of Northville and Plymouth as their territory. They had a post office. They had the first post office because there were only the 2 villages, the one at pardon me, the one at Sheldon, Michigan Avenue, which was settled by Timothy Sheldon in 1825, and well, it probably could have been a little bit before that. That was when they first had the first grants, but they don't know exactly what the year was that they came. Then they had a Methodist church and I believe it was a Congregational church, and a store, a blacksmith shop, a butcher shop, a carpenter shop, and they had a post office there too. And at Cherry Hill was started about the same time, because the first grant was given to the Lewises on North Ridge Road in Cherry Hill in 1825, because I've read that one, they had the little store, which was built in 1830. It would be a handout to customers. It's 1905, West William General Store, dry goods, boots, shoes, hardware, piano, machinery, cash paid for butter and eggs. This is Cherry Hill, Michigan. It's a little case that was at the Cherry Hill store, originally in the little store, and then in the where the inn was, and they kept little small articles that might be picked up easily, like watches and pens and Jake West in the store. It shows the little case there on the wall, or it's on the counter, I guess. Cherry Hill Methodist Church Society was started in 1834. That was the same year that Canton became established. I didn't say that, did I? And they met in cabins until 1848, when they built a frame building there on the same property. And then in 1882, they built the brick building. And it's still the same as it was, the building itself, same, looks on the outside the same as it was when they built it in 1882. I've been going there 70 years. The school was first a cabin school on Ridge Road, right across from the cemetery, and it was built. A brick school was built in 1876 on North Ridge and Cherry Hill, and in 1942, Mr. Ford got a hold of it and changed it, so it looks like it does now. The inn was built in 1860 by Abner Hitchcock, and he thought that the road between Chicago and Detroit was coming through on Cherry Hill Road, which was a possibility, because Cherry Hill Road is a straight road. It runs straight through into where the Ford property is, Dearborn, and then, but it does curve around into Dixboro. But it's probably, how many miles? It'd be better than 20 miles of a straight road. And so, but he let it go for taxes about 3 years later. And we've got the abstract, and all through the abstract he's trying to claim it back, but he didn't get it. We have a society member that was a niece of the woman he married, and she was Cody, and that was an old name an early name in Canton, in Cherry Hill, and she had $6,000, and he thinks that's the reason he married her. Father knew about it in 1917, and he died in 1924, and his son Jake was the man that took over for the, and he had been with his father for years. And all the boys grew up in the store, but they went different ways, except for my husband, that he stayed in the grocery business. You know, after he tipped over the truck, and we had a store in Salem, and he had the store in Salem for 9 years, drove back and forth from here to the store, and then he sold the business. He didn't own the store, he just owned the business. He sold the business and went into work for his brothers in four brothers that had started the car business in Plymouth, his West Brothers car business. And they had he sold the farm machinery still before he sold the cars. And so he got, after he was selling groceries all over the Canton, see, he went from Cherry Hill, he went east to Canton Center and west to Prospect, and he went from Cherry Hill to north to Joy Road and south to Michigan Avenue, so he covered a lot of territory. He also did the same with selling farm machinery. So say I never worked outside the house, because I did for 3 months. I worked at Ford's. I lied about my age. I was only 17, graduated from high school in June, and I worked on a line tying coils, and worked 8 hours a day for $3 and a half. And I got 1 week's pay at $5 a day. And they laid off 20 girls. Well, it would be in 1934, because it was 1934. And I got married in 1935, so, that's the only time I ever worked outside the home.